All right, for those of you that haven't worked on a Mac before, down here in the lower left is going to be your launch pad. This is access to all of the applications. All the Adobe apps are in here. These are the icons we see for them with the characters. We're going to look for the PR for our Premiere Pro 2021. Let's go ahead and select that. Let's give us a chance to open it up, make sure that everything works like it should. It should open up and allow you to begin to work with it. Bueller. Again, once you have that registered inside of PeachPit, remember you do have the web version. The other nice thing about the web version is there are videos inside of there. So when you get working through it, if you find yourself in a spot you don't really remember what's there, maybe you don't want to jump back into the class lecture and you just want to go ahead and look at that specific thing. If you go to the web edition, there are a bunch of videos inside of there that you can pull out of there, or watch on there, I should say. You can't remove them from there. I wish you could, because I'd love to be able to populate them into the LMS, but we can't. So you go ahead and start it up. You're going to see something that looks like this, or should see something that looks like this. Everybody's open? Okay. You see a start menu or something similar to this? Go ahead and maximize it just a little bit. So we go in here. There are abilities to go in and work with this tutorial. The one thing that's been added into the newer versions of the apps is there's an actual Learn workspace. And that Learn workspace will walk you through some basic tutorials on placing content. So if you're looking to go in and play with something, test something out, that Learn does have additional tutorials in there that you can go ahead and follow. Now, depending on what you have opened in here, or how often this app's been used on the computer you're sitting on, you may see things under the recent, or you may see absolutely nothing under the recent. It may be completely blank at this time. That's a quick way for us to go and get into those individual areas. Now, if you want to, we can go in here, we can look at this tutorial. If you click on Start Tutorial, it's going to automatically go in and open up whatever the project is. It should automatically have all the files linked into here to where you don't have to go in and do other things with them. So you can see there, when you go in to open it up, you may have seen on this one, at least it flashed briefly, that red indicating media offline. You can't find the media. That's because the media content, it wasn't finding it at the moment, but it went through and automatically was able to relink what is in there. The nice thing about going ahead and opening up this tutorial just briefly is going to allow you to see that what's in here and have additional items on the various tracks that are inside of your timeline. So we look at lesson one. What we're really looking at here in touring Adobe Premiere Pro is starting to understand where things are at. We're going to talk about performing a nonlinear editing sequence. We're also going to go in and do a quick little adjustment to something. We're going to start to understand what the digital video workflow looks like. As we talk about the workflow, the nice thing about nonlinear editing is that's the key part of it, is the nonlinear portion of it. It allows us to go back in and edit at any time. We can go in and we can cut something out, add something in any part of it, as opposed to dealing with linear editing, where we're dealing with pulling the film strip. We got to cut it, and then we go ahead and we attach the next piece to it. In this, we can go back in and we can cut and splice. Can you in film? You can in film too. You can get back into it, but in that case, we're still going all the way through the whole line as we look at what's there. So we're going to enhance the workflow. We'll look at some high-level features that are available to us. We're going to explore the workspaces. We'll talk about customizing workspaces. I'm not a big one that does a lot of customizations, mainly because in the educational setting, the next person that sits down at that computer is probably going to change what's there. Can we save them? Yes. If you work with your panels in goofy spots, and I say goofy, to you it's normal, it's fine. It's not meant to be harmful towards you. But if you do some really odd things as to how you set things up, go ahead and you can save that workspace so you can go back in and see that workspace. There's the ability to set keyboard shortcuts. Once again, in an educational setting, as you're learning apps, I always recommend you leave things on the default. And that way, when you run into problems, not only can I assist you better if everything's on default, but somebody else who's around you or you're working with that knows the applications is going to go back to the default ones as well. So if we go and we look at what we have inside of here. So this is our workspace. This is what we're going to go in here and see. If we look at the very top, you're going to see right now it says learning. These across the top, these are all the additional workspaces. So assembly, editing, color, effects, audio, graphics, captions, libraries. If we click on the drop down, you're going to see there's also meta logging and production. So it does allow us to go in and decide what it is that we want to ultimately work in. If we come down below here, we have our source panel. Now, as we start to work, you're going to start to see that our source and our program monitor, so our source monitor, program monitor, those two look very similar. The difference is the source is dealing with what file are we currently on. The program actually shows us what we're outputting. So if you kind of think about it, the output, the program is what show we're watching. The source is as we start to grab the clips and as we go through, we start creating our edit points. So our in points and our out points and what we're choosing on there, that's what we're going to see inside of the source monitor. You'll see as we start to work with things that what we're playing with in the source monitor does not show up on the program monitor until we actually add that into the timeline. So this is our source monitor. As we go through here and we start to work with clips, if I were to double click in this case on the Papers MP4, you're going to see that it loads up inside of here. Notice we have that blue bounding box going around the outside of that. That's letting us know that that individual window is selected. It does matter because when we go over here into our program monitor, if I hit the space bar to go through and play the content, then it's going to play over the program monitor versus the source monitor if I hit the space bar. So it's important to watch where you see that boundary being illuminated because that's what we're going to be controlling as we go through and play it. Now you'll notice when we went through and we're working with the program monitor, anytime we actually use a space bar to start to play through it, it automatically moves the playhead down here inside of our timeline. So down below here, this is our timeline. What we're seeing over here on the left-hand side are the tracks. Anything that has content out here then are files or parts of things that have been dropped into our timeline. Stuff across the top as we start to work with the colors that are up there are going to begin to indicate to you, of course, is something rendered, not rendered. When we start getting into the red, the issue with red is as it goes through to play, there's a high possibility that we're going to be dropping frames. In that case, it's only going to render out a certain number of frames as it goes. It'll skip frames. As you go through, and you'll see the more we work with it, as you go through and play that and you allow the render to loop, if you have enough space and processor capabilities, you'll start to see that it'll slowly go to green, and eventually it'll be completely green. The same thing happens even inside of After Effects. When you start, there's nothing up there. It may go through and you may see colors change, and the more times it loops, it goes through and it renders out more and more frames, and eventually everything is green. It'll play a little choppy sometimes. We're going to talk inside of here as we go through and begin to work, though, also how we can deal with resolution. So instead of playing it at full resolution, always in preview, we can preview it in half resolution, quarter resolution, eighth resolution, just depending on what the actual resolution is of the footage as to how far we need to step it down. Once we go and we pause it, anytime we deal with pausing, it's always going to be at 100% resolution. So that's going to be full resolution anytime something's paused. These are our different tracks. It'll make a lot more sense as we get working in here. Video 1, video 2, video 3. The way they are in a stacking order, it's the same thing as when we're working in any other application. If it's up higher, that's the thing that we're going to see. We go down and we start dealing with audio tracks. Now, audio tracks are all going to play. Again, it's the same thing inside of After Effects for those of you that are taking it or are going to play with it in the future. Any of the audio files, no matter where the track's at, it's going to play that. Just because we have track 1 or 2 stacked on track 3, we're still going to hear 2 and 3. It's only the video files in which we're only going to see the content that is on the video, one that is on top. Now, if we are only using part of the real estate, yes, we could do full picture-in-picture and stuff like that inside of it by stacking up our different video tracks that are there. These are the other tools. We're going to get into every one of these tools, going through and dealing with our edits, whether we're dealing with ripples, cuts, slips, the pen, the hand, and even dealing with text inside of here. Over here on the left then is our project panel. This is where everything is at. These are thumbnails in here right now that we can go through and we can see. We have the ability down here at the bottom to adjust those. So if you'd rather see a list, you can see a list. If you'd rather see the icons, we can go and we can do that. If we go in freeform view, this allows you to move things around. Just depends on what you choose to use or how you like to look at stuff is going to be what you decide to set up inside of there. So we go through and we start to play the stuff. Again, focus on where that bounding box is. That's going to have a lot to do with what is currently active inside of here. Now, as we go through and we start working on getting organized, if we come over here and we look inside of our project panel, now all of these can move. So we can go ahead and we can bring these up. We can adjust what's here so that we can make our spaces work for whatever it is that we're doing. If you have clips that you bring in, you've already gone through and maybe you've edited them up. So let's take, for example, when we start getting into that first project that we're going to be working on, everything's 10-second clips. If you've already gone through and cut them off at 10 seconds and they're exactly 10 seconds, you import them, maybe then in this case the source and the program monitor don't mean much to you because you can drag and drop them. So with that, we can go ahead and we can adjust what we have on there. As we start to work inside of these panels, what you're going to also see is that any of these sources that are here, that are in the project, if you hover over them and start to scrub across, and there's no keys to press, you just simply move the mouse across there, it will allow you to go through and see the content. Same thing if we come down here, we can go across that. When we're working inside the project panel, notice that I'm scrubbing. We know we have audio because down here in the lower right-hand corner it tells us we have audio, but notice you're not hearing any sound. And I did unmute it, just in case you're curious. If we do the same thing, though, if we start scrubbing the stuff inside of our source monitor, you will hear audio. So keep that in mind as you go through and begin to work with that. So this allows us to go through and look at the different views. It doesn't matter to me what you decide to work in. A lot of times when I'm working, most of my stuff is in list, unless I have a couple of clips that I know are very similar. At that point, I may go into this icon setup to allow me to scrub through looking for what identifies maybe a certain individual characteristic to me. So this allows us to look at our content. Don't be afraid to scrub through there, look at some of the stuff that's inside of there. Now we go into create ourselves a sequence. So when we go through and we start looking at our project panel, we need to then look at what content it is, and they want you to drag one over. They're using the camera MP4. So when we go through to start to build something. Right now, if we look at it on the right with our timeline, we see that there's no sequence. And today should probably your brain should just want to be exploding with all the stuff we're talking about today, getting used to what's in here. We're going to go back in and we're going to step our way through it. So don't be concerned as we get going here. So we see no sequences. If I grab this camera MP4 and I drag it over top of my timeline, notice that we see the little plus show up next to the hand. When I let go of that in there, it's going to create me my first sequence. So as we go through and we create this sequence, it's going to go in there. It's working off of the information that's on that MP4. You'll also notice that inside of the project, you now have a new file in there. You see that one down there? Comes up, it says camera right down here. And we can start to look at the icons in the corners as to what exactly is it that we are working with. What do we have? What do they do? What can we do with them? Those are quick ways, especially when you're handed a file or somebody sends you files and you're trying to figure out what exactly is in them. So if you look down there in the lower right-hand corner, what do you see? What does that look like? What's that? So if we move over, right, it's like the timeline. So we see the playhead and we see different tracks that are overlapping. That's indicating to us that that's a sequence. So we can quickly go ahead and we can look down there and we can see that we have a sequence. That sequence, the settings for the sequence match up exactly with the settings from that camera MP4. So when we start working on capturing any content using the same camera settings will make your life a lot easier. So just keep that in mind as we go through and we bring that in, whatever it is. If you're shooting in high definition with a GoPro, keep those same settings on there. When we talk about frame rate, same thing. Because later on as we get going in here, we start talking about sequences, you know, what happens when we go ahead and we bring in something that's 1080 at 60 frames into a project that's 1080 at 30 frames per second. All of a sudden, we have a 3-second video. How long does that video become when we bring that 1080-60 into a 30 frames per second? So we have 3 seconds of 1080-60. We're bringing it into a 1080-30. How long does that video become? 6 seconds. So it's automatically going to double it. So when we take what happened in 3 seconds and make it over 6 seconds, what's happening with our action? It's slowing down. So now all of a sudden, it looks slower. You can use that to your advantage too, though, as you go to film. If you want to film something and you want it to slow down the actions, we could in essence capture it at twice the frame rate to slow down the action. But now you have to remember, though, that 3 seconds takes 6 seconds to actually occur inside of your sequence. So those are all things as you begin to assemble it, thinking about it and keeping focus on it inside of your head so you're aware of what you're doing with it. Now we go through and we start working with videos. The other thing we're going to have to start to do is set up ourselves some in points and some out points. The way we're going to do it in here, just so you can set it, so you can see kind of what we're going to do with it, is not how you're going to end up doing it when you're working on the project. Because we're not going to work in this little tiny project panel. You know, if we go slowly over this project panel, so if I click in here and I have this, I can actually press I, which will set an endpoint, and you can see here when I set the endpoint, notice how this early part here goes away from being blue and goes to gray. That's because we're not using that. The endpoint says we're going to start here. If I go ahead and scrub over and I decide I want this and I hit O for my out point, we now have taken that clip and we've just gone through and we've sliced that clip by creating an endpoint and an out point for it. Now what's going to happen with that is we have edited this, which means we grab a hold of it in this case and we drag it out here and we drop it to the end. All that's going to come out here is going to be that portion that deals with the segment between the in point and the out point. So as I go through and bring it in, a quick way to move between your edit points is the up and down arrows. So you'll see if I press the down arrow, it jumps out to that next edit. And we can see, if we look at our program monitor here, this is just the area that I actually went in there and picked. So we're not seeing the whole clip, we're only seeing that portion of it. So that's one way we could do it. We're going to be working inside of our source monitor just because it gives us a lot more control over what it is that we want to do with it. And that's what we'll get into as we work with that. Now we can also add clips from the source monitor as I talked about. So let's go ahead and we'll come down here to our presentation MP4 file. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to go ahead and double click on that presentation MP4 file. When you do that, where does it go? Source. Goes up to our source monitor. At this time, if you've reduced the size of it, you may want to go ahead and adjust this a little bit so we can see a bit more of our source monitor. So when we go up and we look at our content up here, what you're going to see inside of here is they've set an in point and out point for us already. Or these are markers that they indicate for where they want you to do an in point and out point is what I should say. So if we go and we grab a hold, we can go ahead and we can adjust what we're viewing up here. Now this allows us to go in, we can zoom all the way down into frame by frame by frame. So depending on what you want to do, we can go ahead and we can adjust there. So we can cut down what it is we're seeing. So if we're trying to get in there and really be specific. The other thing we can do with this is over top of this blue text. This is indicating where's the playhead. Right now the playhead sits right here. It's showing it at 5:01. If I go ahead and click and drag to the left, you'll see it goes back towards where that marker is at. We can go ahead and we can add markers in here, and we're going to add markers eventually. I don't think we're going to do it all in this, but we're going to start talking about markers as you go through with videos. If you're doing large videos and you start thinking about chapter markers so that you can quickly jump to different areas. If you're watching a DVD, even when you're watching the new ones, a lot of them will have like spots you can jump to. That's what is here. And it gives you a new thumbnail with that. So we go ahead and we move that over to approximately the 2-second mark. If we go ahead and hit I, again, notice that the outline goes around my source monitor, indicating that that's what's active. So we go ahead and hit I, it gives us that. Once we have that set as our endpoint, we can go over to find where we have the other marker, which they have set at about 8 seconds. So we can go ahead and we can do this a couple different ways. We can drag that playhead. We can come over top of the text that's here. The other thing you can also do is if you actually go ahead and click on the blue text, it's going to pop up. It's going to allow you to edit what's there. The thing to get used to as you start working with videos, what we have is we have hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. So keep in mind that as you go through to work with that, over 30 frames per second, the highest number that's going to show up in that last set of numbers is going to be a 29. So as we go through and we start to think about that, and it's at 30 frames per second, really what it's at is 29.97 frames per second. So when you put in 30 and you see 29.97, it's fine. That's what it should be. But inside of here, for example, if I want to go to 8 seconds, I'm just going to put in 800. And when you hit return, you'll see that it automatically works from that right to left. So it goes in there and says, okay, it's 008. It's going to allow it to jump out to there. If we go ahead and we set O for our out point, we're going to go ahead and see what we have on there. We'll later on start working with other ways to send it over there. We're going to start talking about the 2 edits and we start dealing with an insert or an overwrite. In this case, though, we can also just click on there and drag down. So drag from inside right over top where the source monitor is at on the text, drag it down. It's automatically going to move down only what is between the in point and the out point. Now we could go through and we can continue to change additional things. So we can go and we can start to look at color. We can add some graphics to it. We can add audio. And they have additional things inside of here that we can go in and add to it, but we're not going to continue on to that part because we're going to go and we're going to start creating our content. We're going to work with audio and really focus on making the changes to it. But that at least gets you an idea as to where the different things are inside of here as we get started. And like I said, that's the tutorial portion of it that we're going to jump in and we're going to take a look at lesson number 1 and really start to understand more about the workflow. So this is really designed to get you in here and maybe take a little bit of the, oh my gosh, there's a lot of stuff in here and I don't know what any of it does. And that really simplifies it. Now having a little bit of understanding of what's there, it's going to allow us to go in and begin. We're going to take a little jump back and start plugging through understanding our workflow. So questions?